Let us understand who a DevOps engineer is, what is DevOps, what they do on a day-to-day basis, without using all the buzzwords and the big technical terms that could actually confuse you. In this video, we would be understanding using analogies of day-to-day companies and what you could do on a daily basis if you are trying to get into DevOps. The goal of this video is to have you understand what this is if you are trying to make a decision and get clarity so you know if this is for you or if this is not for you. So before we get into all of the big words on this screen and try to get it complicated, let's understand how things worked before DevOps. So before DevOps, in the world of software development and software delivery, most companies, right, when they were developing any sort of software, let's say Amazon, for example, right, let's say they are writing a feature for their e-commerce application. A developer would start writing the code, right? When he gets the requirement from management, right? He starts writing the code for the application. He writes the code onto a server that was provisioned by a systems administrator, right? So once he's writing that code on a server, you have a QE engineer that would come and run tests on those code. He's testing it to make sure that it works with the other code that has already been written, testing it for vulnerabilities, and just to make sure that the code is within industry standard, right? When the QE engineer tests the code, if there were any issues in the code, he creates a ticket for the dev to come back and work again on the code. When the dev comes back and work on the code, he notifies the QE engineer, hey, I'm done, could you test it again? Now, only this process here could take weeks, maybe even months, right? And then once this is done, a build and release engineer would come, get this code from this server and ship it to production, making it available to all the end users of Amazon, right? So all of this process could take months and it was taking too long. Companies need to be competitive. Like, let's say Uber and Lyft, for example. Say Uber releases a feature, right? In their, for example, Uber Eats. Uber Eats is a feature within Uber, right? Lyft might say, hey, we want to do the same thing. So imagine Lyft taking a year to build their code and ship it. It's by the time their code would be, by the time they actually release Lyft Eats, for example, Uber must have had all the market share. So what happened is in the software engineering world, because the build and release engineer was also part of the ops team, and we had the dev team. So this was the dev. The dev writes the code, but the dev is not responsible for making the code available to the end user. That's the build and release engineer. This process taking all this time was not good. It wasn't good in the standard for the industry. Things needed to get done fast. So that's what created the role DevOps. So that's why we see the official definition, which says a DevOps engineer bridges the gap between development and operations to make sure that software is being delivered faster. Now, how does a DevOps engineer get to do that? He does that by building and designing automated CI/CD pipelines. That's why you hear of CI/CD. So CI/CD basically is continuous integration and continuous deployment. So rather than having all this manual process, the dev writes the code, he puts it in a server, someone comes and tests it, the testing would be automated. So a DevOps engineer builds something that's called a pipeline, and within the pipeline, all of these tests that the QE engineer was supposed to do would be run automatically on the pipeline. As a DevOps engineer, you also manage containers. This could be Kubernetes containers. Now this is advanced, it's just part of what you do. I know this is a beginner video, but Kubernetes is basically container orchestration. And when we get into the world of microservice architecture and how applications are being deployed today, then you would understand what Kubernetes is. But he manages Kubernetes containers. As a DevOps engineer, you also spend your time working with infrastructure as code, which is Terraform. So with Terraform as a DevOps engineer, right, another thing you do is, say, for example, Amazon's e-commerce application, right? That application does run on hardware because the application does need memory, CPU, right? So as a DevOps engineer, building out these cloud resources, sometimes it is time consuming. Back in the day, systems administrator used to build out Linux servers from scratch. I remember how painful that was, right? But nowadays, you could just use Terraform. You write your configurations of what infrastructure you're trying to build on the cloud, and you automate that process. So you could actually literally build 100 virtual Linux machines in actually less than 30 minutes. Back in the day, it might have taken you days. And that is the power of one DevOps engineer. As a DevOps engineer too, building these CI/CD pipelines, if you integrate a lot of security gates and security checks in your pipelines, that's how it moves from DevOps to DevSecOps. So it's not just about making sure that your code is being deployed to production fast enough. You are also making sure that it's secured, right? And as a DevOps engineer, you also manage releases and deployment workflows. So there is a process to deploying and delivering software. For example, if you use an Apple iPhone, you do recall sometimes at night or during the day, you see a notification, hey, iOS update, but your buddy or your friend doesn't have the same update. That's because of how it was configured to deliver that software. A DevOps engineer at Apple, like most all of them, they had meetings and they sit and they actually strategize. Should we release it like bit by bit, which is what we call canary method of deployment, which means we are releasing the software to different populations, different sectors of the populations, or different groups of people at different times? Or are we doing a mass release? Like, are we just shipping out this code at the same time to everybody? So when you hear of DevOps and you see all these tools, what do we talk about? This is all what it is. Jenkins is basically a CI/CD tool, right? Nowadays, if you are trying to get into DevOps, actually, I would say don't spend a lot of time on Jenkins. You want to spend more time learning GitHub Actions, because that's what is being used today a lot. All these tools, Dockers, that's actually containerizing an application, is part of the tools a DevOps engineer uses on a day-to-day basis. Kubernetes as well. Kubernetes is basically Docker on steroids. It has like a whole bunch of features that Docker containers don't have, self-healing, and we also have Terraform. You learning Terraform would actually make you really good so you can automate and provision infrastructure in the cloud. Ansible is for configuration management. Some companies, you might need them, some you might, but it's good as well learning them. And also learning Prometheus and Grafana for observability. So as a DevOps engineer, you spend your time designing. So the main goal with DevOps is designing pipelines. Now, this role has evolved into a lot of different roles between different companies, but this is just explaining to you what a DevOps engineer does, right? So when your developer writes code, right, and he commits that code into a version control system and no longer a server such as 10 years ago, your pipeline runs automatically. Within your pipeline, the code is built, the code is tested, the code is scanned, and the code is deployed. Now, after the code is deployed, what do? You set up monitoring for the code. For example, you deployed live-its, right? Once if live-its is being deployed, as a DevOps engineer, you are responsible for scalability as well. Or you could configure and set up scalability so that if the amount of people that are trying to access that service at any given time spikes up, the application should be ready to receive those users. And at the same time, if the users reduce, the application services or the containers running the application should scale down so that you can optimize your resources, right? So that's basically what a DevOps engineer does, right? And it goes between company to company, right? Sometimes they play with it, but if we could just go over this diagram real quick, wrap this up. So as a DevOps engineer, your main focus is trying to automate everything. Sometimes your work could be 50-50. You could be doing a lot of build and release as well, and you could be doing a lot of developer support, where developers, you are actually setting up. I'll make a whole series on the day-to-day of what a DevOps engineer does, how in the morning you could be troubleshooting an instance, you could be setting up monitoring, and based on like what really happens and what we do on a day-to-day basis, right? And to conclude, you bridge the gap between development and operations, which simplifies the word DevOps, right? And you enable the software to be delivered faster. Here are your key responsibilities: CI/CD, infrastructure as code, monitoring, observability. And the reason why a lot of DevOps engineers get paid a lot of money, so the industry standard is about 100, and it starts in North America. You could start off at about 140, right? Anywhere between 140 all the way up to $200,000 plus, depending on the company, their need, their demand, and what they are. But the reason is because the business impact of DevOps is a lot. Say, for example, Amazon. Guys, imagine, or let's say Uber Eats, for example, right? Uber Eats is a microservice within Uber, right? Imagine, even Uber, for example, guys, imagine someone wanting, or people wanting to order rides on Uber and the application is down, or Uber's payment service is down. Guys, it's like World War III for Uber in the software development world or software application world, because they are losing money. They are losing money by the hour, by the minute, and they are losing customer base because that customer not only leaves Uber and goes and now use another app such as DoorDash or Lyft. The customer is also frustrated and they might tell their brother. So that's why a company is like, hey, we don't want downtime. If we don't want downtime, what are we going to do? We are better off paying a DevOps engineer even $300,000 a year, right? Because it's the business impact. The business impact is so hard. Faster time to market. Remember the example I used between Uber and Lyft? Lyft trying to develop, say, Lyft Eats, because Uber came out with Uber Eats and Lyft wants to compete because they are competitors in the space. Guess what? It could take them a year, right? So that's the whole point of being a DevOps. You see, that's why you end up having happy customers. And by having less downtime, you have lower cost, right? So all of these tools here, right? For example, these are just some of the tools a DevOps engineer works with whenever with software planning and application software development. He always starts with the planning phase where Jira tickets are being created. There's a lot of documentation in Confluence in the team, and then developers start writing their code in Git or GitHub. Don't learn GitHub and GitLab. This is not a roadmap class, but just saying, pick one. It's 2026. You have to be fast. You have to be fast. You're trying to get paid and get paid fast. And you're trying to learn these things, right? It's like saying you want to learn how to drive a Toyota Corolla and you want to learn how to drive a Nissan. No, learn one. They're both the same thing. Stop taking wrong roadmaps, right? So, for example, you see Maven and Gradle for build tools. Learn one. Learn one. Don't learn both, right? Learn a build tool. So, developer hooks up their code, right? In the pipeline, Maven runs, build the code, and there's a lot of unit testing. You could use Selenium, JUnit. You could also use SonarQube for unit testing, right? And you could use Nexus for Artifactory management, or you could use JFrog, right? And then your application gets deployed to Kubernetes, right? To a Kubernetes cluster. So this is all about DevOps, guys. If you have any questions and you did not understand the video, you want me to explain it to you in some other type of way, or you are interested in DevOps, hey,